Welcome, Mia, to the Root of Our Health. It is such a pleasure to have you on this show. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Well, first, before we do a deep dive into the menstrual cycle awareness, I just want to obviously to have me and my audience know a little bit about you and your background. So if you can give us a little bit of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of my background comes from being a yoga instructor for about the past decade and really learning about the body through that. Getting really, really interested in especially women's health and how the practices of yoga can be supportive through life transitions. And I found this really beautiful work when talking about menstrual cycle awareness as this type of inner yoga. So I went on from this yoga teaching to get some more training in menstrual cycle awareness in leading women's groups and women's circles. And I've also traveled quite a bit, and that's really led to a lot of the work that I've done. I've traveled and interviewed women and written a book on that. And just really collecting those stories has helped me to realize how much of these things are pertinent throughout so many ages, backgrounds, histories, and how so many of us can relate in this way.
Nice, very nice. And so, what is the book called? So I can go ahead and put that in the show notes.
The book is called Good Enough, and
Okay.
it's a compilation of poetry and drawings from women from around the world.
How beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, creativity, bringing that feminine creativity out. So that's definitely key. Um, One thing that, so I did look at your website and kind of read through a little bit. And on there, you mentioned about something that I could relate more in terms of masculine energy or masculine way of living in your
Mhm.
past and then pushing through life. Now that's again, it's something that I find I have more of is the masculine energy kind of I have a hard time and I try as best as I can to do at least one day of yoga or Pilates. And especially, I will say, I do one day, probably the first day of my cycle, I do a menstrual yoga. So I
Mm.
will go ahead and put that on and do that for that day. But all of the other, days in that month, I tend to want to go hard and I tend to want to, just push my body to the limit again, whether it's exercise, whether it's just energy in itself. And so from that, I want to understand how you personally went through and changed and how long did it take?
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing question. And so many women are in really similar spots. And
Mhm.
I want to start by saying there's nothing wrong with pushing our bodies. Like, they're amazing things and they can regenerate. And so, a big piece of what I teach is there's no right or wrong. But when we start to learn how we can work with our cycles, there can be times where our bodies actually are really calling for that, like pushing and that directive and that masculine energy. And there may be times when we're calling for something softer. So it's about recognizing and honoring both. In my personal journey, I was very similar to you. I like took no days off ever. I trained a lot. I was an ultra runner, a really big athlete, and I followed these plans to a T. I was like, I need to make these. I can do it. I can keep up with the guys, all of those things. And there was a piece of that that made me feel really strong. And there was a piece of that that very slowly started to wear on my body. And I started to realize, especially after training for these really big races, I would feel really burnt out, just physically and energetically. And when I started to learn about menstrual cycle awareness, which really is taking the menstrual cycle into four different parts and recognizing with the ups and downs of hormones that there are times when it's actually really beneficial to push the body and there are times to rest. So I think of it kind of like this battery that actually gets to be fully reloaded instead of like always pushing it to the max every day. And there was something really sweet about that that made me first physically feel a lot better. Like, my body was actually recovering a lot faster. I was able to eat foods and feel them actually integrate into my body instead of like, I have to eat so much so that I can just keep training and keep working. Um, and I was just starting to feel this rhythm that really connected me with nature. And that felt like a softer way of living in general, which is a little contrast to
Mm-hmm.
a lot of our culture. So for me, the process took, I would say, probably about 3 to 4 years of really diving into menstrual cycle awareness. Um, Traveling a lot helped because there were times and places where I lived where going on a big run wasn't really safe or there just weren't places to. So that caused me to slow down a bit as well. And starting to realize just what made me feel better. It's a process and it takes cycles to realize like, oh, this feels really good to push, or this feels really good to rest, or oops, I overdid it again, and kind of constantly learning.
Yes, yes to all of that, because it's I don't know about you, but sometimes it's a mindset thing too. You know,
Absolutely.
once you have the results, so to speak, of pushing yourself and going and achieving, it's hard to tell our body, like our minds, to tell our bodies to rest until our bodies say, oh, well, we're taking over here. We're going to need to rest. And it gets to that point of burnout, like you said. And I've been through that in so many ways. And learning, again, yeah, like you said, learning to just honor our bodies. And especially when we get older, right? It's not always going to be easy doing the transitions and all of that, but it's just more or less honoring our femininity, doing the I like to call it like yin yang kind of thing. You know, you have your balance. So going hard when you need to and going soft when you need to. And speaking of which, so I a lot of women actually take their menstrual cycle for granted, right? We say, "Oh my gosh, it's that time of month again," or it's amazing how actually I've excuse me, I've talked to a few of my clients and they don't even track their menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how do you not do that? Like I can't fathom. I'm literally looking every day. Well, not really, but sometimes I even track and put in my, my moods and my, cuz it's another tracking device I think that we have, which is great. But more so than not, a lot of women just take advantage of it. They hate it. They just, in general. So the last actually probably few years, maybe 2 or 3 years, I've really, and like I said, I track it, but I've really gotten into the four phases. Like it's just a beautiful, like understanding, because when you understand what those phases are, you can also be aware of what your body is going through, your mind and your body. And it's just such an interesting thing to see, to where that correlation resides. So, can you just speak about what these four phases are and how we move through them, and so my listeners can understand a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to speak to that as well, a lot of that's about being able to turn towards the things in life in general that make us a little uncomfortable. Like there's so much energetically there. And a lot of us aren't taught to respect these and know them as girls. So it makes a lot of sense that a lot of people aren't tracking because they don't want to know or don't see the power in it. And there's this side as well to recognize that for some people, having a period can be really painful or can come with a lot of symptoms. And there's can be many various reasons for that. So there's lots of little things to pay attention to within that. And no matter where anybody is on that scale, going through these phases can actually help them recognize where are the times that they have a lot of control in being able to make symptoms feel a lot better, being able to honor their body, or even knowing when things are really out of balance and being able to adjust those and get help when needed. So, a lot of different things along that scale. And I do find knowing these four phases can also help people feel that sense of belonging in a way, of knowing that it's okay to feel differently during these four different times. So, a quick overview of the menstrual cycle. In women's wisdom, breaking it down into four phases. The first one that I like to start with is the menstrual cycle because most of us know what that means. And for a lot of people, when they think of the menstrual cycle, they think we're just talking about getting a period. It's like on or off.
Right.
So, having a period and this time when hormones are at their lowest, so can be related to a seasonal awareness as well. And this is how I like to use language throughout the four types of the menstrual cycle because it helps people relate to something that they can physically see and feel in nature. So, the menstrual cycle relating to winter, and for those who are living in places with four seasons, winter tends to be the coldest, darkest, quieter. People don't generally have as much energy during that time. It might be a little less social. So, those are all things that I think of during that time, needing a little bit more rest and also opening up to quite a bit more of an intuitive sense. So, I say like the logical brain kind of calms down and the intuitive brain ramps up. Similarly to a cold winter day when you might be inside baking or painting or reading a book or something that feels, again, kind of like that creativity and maybe a little bit less of that productivity. When we move into the next phase, it starts at somewhere between day 3 and 5 of the cycle. So, day 1 is the first day of bleeding. And that's how, if you want to track the cycle, you can start tracking. So, when bleeding stops, usually about day 5 to 7 or 8, we start the pre ovulatory phase. And that relates to the season of spring. And what I love about this analogy again is that spring comes on little by little, depending on where you live. But for most of us, it's not like we wake up one day and all of the flowers are out and everything's blooming. But it's that beautiful part of the season when you're walking around and you're like, that flower's out, or oh my gosh, look at that tree. Like there's a little bit more energy each time. And when we actually look at the hormone chart as well, estrogen is increasing during this time. But it kind of looks like a roller coaster if you look at a hormone chart. So there, it's a little bit more energy each day, which can kind of be something really tough for women who are like, okay, I'm done bleeding. I'm going to go do everything right now. And it's this reminder that actually it's a little more energy each day. And if we use all of that up, that can be what leads to burnout. So if we honor that we might still need some rest during this week or so of the cycle, and we might start to feel some of that childlike curiosity that a lot of us feel in the springtime. So we might feel a little bit more social, a little bit more creative, a little bit more productivity, and a lot of playfulness. And then after that, the season of the ovulation part of the cycle. So ovulation happens during a day, but when we're talking energetically, it's usually about 2 or 3 days before and 2 or 3 days after. And that's when estrogen is at its highest. And so this can be the time in the cycle to actually really push ourselves because energy levels are typically at their highest. Strength, like physical strength, can be at its highest. Typically, the mood is fairly lifted during this time. Estrogen is the thing that allows for the hard nails and the shiny skin and shiny hair. So we might actually feel like being a little bit more social and out, a little bit sexier. Some of those will kind of come up as well. And then we have our premenstrual phase. And when you look at a hormone chart for this time, estrogen decreases really quickly. And then progesterone picks up about halfway through this part of the cycle. Progesterone for many women feels like a bit of a calmer hormone. So there can still be productivity there. There might still be an interest in working the body physically hard, but it's a little less of a bubbly energy and more of like a calming, centered strength type of energy. So this can be a wonderful time relating to the fall season of the year for cleaning things out, getting things done, finishing projects, or setting things up for some self-care, knowing that the period is coming. So there might be some food prep or finishing up work or things that you can help to allow for the period to be a nicer, calmer time. And then we start seasons again.
Okay. Well, thank you. I like the analogy of going through the seasons because I think that definitely correlates with that. Um, question that I have regarding progesterone and estrogen, right?
Mhm.
You mentioned that so all of the hormones are low in the menstruation cycle.
Mhm.
Is that I guess maybe I'm wrong, but I thought like estrogen was the highest at in ovul or in the menstruation cycle, and you want to kind of even them out, the testosterone, the progesterone, and the oh my gosh, what's, you know,
Yeah,
um,
Progesterone.
estrogen. Thank you. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the reason why I'm asking is because I to balance out everything,
Mhm.
I've realized that by buying a progesterone supplement and taking it in luteal phase
Mhm.
through the menstrual phase, it has actually helped me combat PMS. So,
Beautiful.
I used to get the bloating. I still
Mhm.
do a little bit, but just like irritable, all of the symptoms that we hate. So is
Yeah.
that like, what is your thought about like progesterone supplements and like the ebbs and flows of both of those hormones in the last two phase, or the really last phase and then first phase?
Yeah, so if we're looking after ovulation, we'll kind of start there. This roller coaster dip of estrogen doesn't always happen for everyone. So that is
Yeah.
the ideal, that it kind of clears out of the system. And when we're talking about kind of that balance, what a lot of people are talking about is estrogen dominance. So that can be because estrogen isn't cleared out of the system. So if it's not fully metabolized, we can start to see some of those issues that come up, and they usually do show up around kind of PMS time, so around the premenstrual phase. Um, and so those can show up. So there can be two different ways of either making sure that's cleared out of the system and or making sure that progesterone, which picks up during that last part of the phase, is actually fully picking up. So I think of the hormones a lot. They're kind of in scales. And so if one is too high, there isn't enough room for the other to grow. Like our bucket is only one size. And so when one is taking over, others can't reach it. So for a lot of people, that actually happens because of things like stress hormones will come in and they actually take up too much space. So things like estrogen and progesterone can't have their normal scales. So that's a lot of what we'll see in there. And that can be in excess and again in that estrogen dominance. So I think it depends. And like you're saying as well, you're starting to see that that really does affect the whole cycle. So you're starting to recognize when you need that support, knowing to take it during the end part of the cycle, maybe start of the beginning cycle. And then estrogen sounds like it's working well for you. And
Right.
so for a lot of people, they can notice something different throughout their cycle.
Right. Good. Thank you for explaining
Yeah.
that. Yeah, we're all individual bodies,
Mhm.
so and it goes for really anything in health and wellness. What works for one person may not work for another. So it's
Yeah.
trial and error, but understanding our bodies is number one. So thank you for explaining that.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
exactly what you were saying with the tracking as well, is like that's what's been able to determine, oh, there should be a shift here, but there's not, or I'm not enjoying these symptoms, so I want to figure out a different way. So yeah, tracking is an incredible way that you've been able to figure that out.
exactly, exactly. I definitely put that out there, tracking people, download some apps, whatever you can. I use MyFlow, by the way. And so, we're talking about menstruation, but we're also talking about my audience and I in our
Mhm.
40s and above, who at this point, perimenopause and menopause are like front and center. Not only that's affecting us right now, but it's going to affect down the line very soon. So, can you help us to understand how we can move through these turbulent times in kind of a healthier or just like a more positive manner?
Yeah, absolutely. So menstrual cycle awareness can happen at any time. And I've even taught this to women who are after they're in menopause. But recognizing that there are these cycles that the body goes through can be something really beautiful. There's a traditional Native American saying that says, actually, at menopause is when a woman becomes this power of the things that she's been practicing throughout her bleeding years. So it's this beautiful idea that the actual cycles of bleeding are what's giving the body practice to understand that femininity does move in cycles, and that at some point in life, it's not needed to have those external cycles to know that actually those are just lived within. So for women who have a lot of turbulence during perimenopause time, say, I will actually teach them similar timing with the moon cycle. So the moon as well can be related to the menstrual cycle. Some people have recognized throughout life that they might even sync a bit on and off with the moon. And that also helps to give an anchor. I give this to women who are going through perimenopause, who are pregnant, who for some medical reason don't have a period, who have gone through a hysterectomy, any of those, so that they can still feel this cyclical nature. So that can be a beautiful way. We start with the new moon as bleeding. And then as it gets a little bit brighter, that's kind of its springtime. It moves into its full moon. That's kind of its ovulation time. And then the waning moon. So I teach it in those cycles so that there isn't a shame of like, oh, my body isn't working, or it's not having a cycle, or it had a cycle last month and now it hasn't had one for 3 months. So we teach the moon cycle because we can trust it and it will always be there. And then we have curiosity to the menstrual cycle of like, oh, there was a bleed this month. How can we honor that time? Still coming back to those practices and then recognizing those might be there next month or there's not. But the moon is there, so we can keep using that as an anchor.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I like that. That's something that we can all, again, when something is being taken away from us, it tends to feel like a loss, right? It's another grieving, so to speak, of our life, because it's womanhood. We're all, as much as we hate having their period, it's some of us, but it is our womanhood. It is who we are that distincts us from men,
Mm-hmm.
and our fertility and all of that. So but yeah, I like that you said, going and just the moon cycle itself, just so we can still attach a cycle to it and move through, such as kind of in a way to where it's like cutting off. It's cutting off the other thing. So I'm assuming that's still the same for post menopause, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the case? You just do the moon cycle each and every time?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. If a woman feels like she needs it. So, what's beautiful about that Native American saying is what it's kind of saying is it's so integrated into the body that a woman may not feel like they need to track or need to know exactly what's happening in these 4 different phases. Like a woman might just know this is a time for rest. This is a week for rest. This is a week for doing something big. And that might be more integrated into the body. And maybe it doesn't follow the moon cycle at all. But why I love teaching that is that it is an anchor so that if she might be traveling or a big change happened in her life, she has that to come back to. So I'll kind of say, like, use this to track for the next 3 months or so. Once you get back on, maybe the tracker falls off to the side and maybe you don't need it anymore. Or maybe you love it and that becomes something that you can really count on.
Nice. Yeah. Very good. Um, is there something that is there anything that I haven't asked that you wanted to touch on, or explain in a little bit more detail?
I think another layer that could be its own podcast, so I won't go too deeply, but another thing that has really helped women a lot is besides the seasons of the cycle, I'll also teach as in feminine archetypes. And so each phase of the cycle has an archetype as well. And sometimes having kind of like, it's almost like a character, an embodied character that they feel they can have throughout these different phases. And they also show up throughout life. So that's another thing that I have some blog posts on. So maybe we can link to those.
Yeah.
Um, but that can actually really help women as well, because each of these archetypes have different personalities to them. And really, just the biggest overarching thing in menstrual cycle awareness is the recognition that as women, we shift and change, and we're supported by our natural hormone cycles to do so. And it's actually part of our nature to be able to have strengths during sometimes that are different strengths during others. And so finding that all of these archetypes, all of the seasons of the year are really powerful in their own right. And we never say, like, oh, winter stinks. I mean, some of us might, but we know it has a purpose there, right?
Yeah, of course, of course. As much as again, as much as we hate it, it's there. It's
Right.
not going away. We just
Yeah.
gotta,
And we
yeah,
honor that that's part of the overall cycles of life, and knowing that maybe when we get a lot of snow, that's going to nourish the flowers that will come up later. So things like that. But the archetypes is kind of another thing that I love teaching women, because they're really these embodied characters to say, oh, we have these really different ways that we can show up each time, and those can be all really beautiful and all really different.
nice, very nice. I like that. Can you name the archetypes, or do you want to name them
Yeah,
for us for
absolutely.
now?
So
And I'll definitely put the
yeah,
link in there.
yeah, just a really brief overview, because women may have heard them before. They show up a lot in myths, and especially in kind of women's health circles as well. Um, so, starting with winter and menstruation, since we've kind of been starting there, she's the archetype of the crone. So, she has a lot of wisdom, some magic, some of those deeper, kind of slower visioning superpowers. The springtime or pre ovulation time is the maiden. So we were kind of talking about that spring like childlike energy. The
Yeah.
maiden is really curious, like bright eyed, um, just questioning about life. Like all the possibilities are open to her. Then the ovulation time is called the mother phase. And this can be really beautiful and healing for women who are working with things around mothering, either being a mother or mothering something in their lives. So we talk a lot about the archetype of the mother, like the great mother, and what that can mean. The mother takes on a lot. She can juggle many balls at once, and she needs some self care. So that's a really beautiful mix. And then premenstrual time, the autumn time, is related to the creatrix. Sometimes it's called in some traditions like the wild woman. So the creatrix is starting to take all of the energy that she's given in that mother phase and turn it in towards herself. So that's why we kind of talk about like that fall time energy of starting to wear sweaters and get a little bit cozier and bring in that energy. She can also be a little fiery. Like the creatrix really knows what she wants. And people can feel that during that premenstrual time of like clearing out what's not working, addressing things that need to be addressed, kind of unearthing some issues that are coming up physically or in their lives. So that's just a tiny bit about each of them.
Oh, that's wonderful. I love that. It's just, again, it's another way to look at this time, our months, because it's a month, it's a month to month, and honoring each and every phase, and how we can look at who we show up as, in each phase, and how our energy kind of ebbs and flows and ups and downs, and even, it's interesting, even during certain, like the ovulation, I've noticed it's so interesting. Like even walking down the street, you can notice how there's like an attraction to,
Yeah.
like there's some sort of, aura or
Yeah.
pheromone, or either way, that it's not only just people but opportunities and things just attract. So just one phase is just understanding and being aware of
Yes.
what's happening to you and around you. So it is just fascinating.
Yeah. And women also learn kind of the hard, but also trusting lesson of birth and death in all of those cycles, because it's such a beautiful cycle to be in. And in our culture, a lot of people will get stuck in that of like, well, this happened last week. I feel like I should always be there. I should always be bubbly and shiny and smiley. And and it can be
Yep.
wonderful to like fully enjoy that time when it's there, and also fully find really the wisdom that's in all of the other pieces, because that's kind of the healing of the whole cycle, and the wholeness of being a woman is knowing that each phase has its own beautiful, wonderful thing. And not feeling shame against ourselves of like, oh well, why can't I do what I did last week, or why don't I feel like I did last week?
Right. Exactly. And one, cycle is not the same as the other. Like one month is not going to
Right.
be the same. So
Absolutely.
again, going back to the tracking, it's
Yeah.
just so interesting to see, you do have certain symptoms that happen. I do, like the bloating and the
Mhm.
bloating more so. But it's just fascinating. Yeah, like one day or one month can be, easier, and the other month can be a little harder. So it's always just then you're kind of saying, or I am. I'm not speaking for anybody else, but I'm asking myself. So what was different? Like what changed?
Yeah.
But it could also be like you said. It could also just be the timing and the just in general. It doesn't have to have that one specific thing that changes. So yeah, I definitely this is I don't know. I find this very fascinating because again, growing up or even society tells us, or everybody is just like, I hate this time of month, or and doesn't even understand all the different cycles. And so when I did a deep dive in doing my tracking, it's just an amazing thing for us women to kind of really get deep, and heavy into it. You mentioned yoga for menstruation. Do you what? So talk a little bit about that, because of course I do a YouTube kind of thing, but it's just, if you can talk a little bit about that, of like, what's the difference between regular yoga and yoga for menstruation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a couple different things. Yoga in itself is a practice of recognizing, understanding, and honoring the body. So, the first thing is that when you're practicing yoga, there's so many different types of yoga out there. So, finding a style that actually does connect you to that. Because for some people, they can tend to actually practice a yoga that distracts them from their body, which can be whatever style, but depending on the person. I know I've been there too. It's like you'll go to the class and you're like, I don't know, did I pay attention to my body? I'm not really sure. I think I did the poses. I don't know.
Right.
um, so, whatever it is, the style or the teacher or the setting for some people to make them really be able to tune in and understand is really part of that kind of inner menstrual cycle awareness. There's also different practices that can support different times in the cycle, and practices that can support symptoms that are coming up. So it really depends on what somebody is experiencing. So I would actually give something different to somebody who was experiencing really heavy periods versus somebody who was barely having a period or even skipping months. So it really depends on the person. But in general, having a practice that can really tune you inwards and actually feel like you're able to better listen to your body is really the best thing that I can suggest. Following those cycles can be something fun if that feels like it's really resonating as well, like using the winter to really rest. So I teach my students restorative yoga during that time, where we're holding poses for 3 to 12 or more minutes. And we're in really supportive poses, and they are just completely held by props, and they just feel like they are wrapped and warm and taken care of. And that's like nourishing them during that time. And then we do something a little more playful, kind of in the springtime, We might do something more challenging during ovulatory time. That's kind of where we get into more challenging poses or handstands or fun things if they want to go there. Um, and then we have more of actually do kind of releasing and nervous system work during the premenstrual phase, because that's where a lot of agitation can come up. It's kind of that creatrix energy that's like she's digging things up and things are coming out. So we'll actually do a lot of more like somatic work, like shaking or making sounds. We do humming, singing, things that can really nourish the nervous system during that time. So there isn't, again, a right or wrong way, but recognizing that there might be different practices that can feel more beneficial during those four different phases that can be really helpful. And I'm a huge advocate for restorative yoga. That's really the main thing that I teach during any time, just because I feel like it's so nourishing for women. And even in the ovulation time, we all need rest at different times. So anytime things feel overwhelming, that's really my go to.
Beautiful. Yes. And just listening to you, I get really calm. I'm sure, like with all of this, it's very calming. It's very, yeah, it's just, taking time
Yeah.
for yourselves and taking rest and restoring and,
Yeah.
doing just moving your body and just listening to your body at whatever time or, phase it is just an honor to womanhood. So,
Mm.
thank you so much for being here. Where can people locate you, find you, reach out to you?
Yeah. So the company that I do all of this through is called Move, Create, Radiate. And it's one word. On Instagram is where I show up mostly, Move, Create, Radiate. And my website is movecreateradiate.com. And I would highly suggest going through the blog post on there. I have one on what is menstrual cycle awareness, the archetypes of womanhood, how to follow the moon cycles. So if anyone would like to see what we chatted about today, just in writing, and I have some of those hormone charts and graphics on there as well, that can be a really great place to start.
Beautiful. And I did take a little look, a little gander, and it was very insightful. So I will definitely put everything in the show notes. So all they have to do is click and they are there. And one last question that I have for you: what is your favorite quote or any words of inspiration you can share?
I think I would love to share in full this Native American quote since I've been referencing it. So this comes from many different places. I first found it in Lucy Pierce's book Moontime. That's a wonderful resource for people interested in menstrual cycle awareness. So the quote is: "At her first bleeding, a woman meets her power. During her bleeding years, she practices it. At menopause, she becomes it."
Oh my gosh, that is beautiful. That's it. I'm putting that on my posting that. So that is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. And thank you so much for taking your time out today to share with all of us this beauty that we have, a gift, even if it's not the cycle itself, but the transition and just, being a woman in general. So thank you so much. And to everybody else, have a good one. Bye bye.